All right, thank you. My name is Rakhyun. I'm an assistant professor of global environmental governance at Copernicus Institute of Sustainable Development at Utrecht University. It's my great honor to introduce today's speaker, Professor Sun-Jin Yun from Seoul National University. Professor Yun is widely recognized as the leading authority on South Korean climate and energy policy, with her academic career dating back to the 1990s, which is when she left her previous job as a high school teacher to both master's and PhD degrees at the University of Delaware in the States. Professor Yun is probably one of the best examples of an academic making a societal impact. She has been visibly active in policy arena and often found at the forefront of energy transition movement in the South Korean context. Professor Yun has founded and also led multiple civil society groups in the area of energy transition, including a nationwide alliance of environmental NGOs. The latest addition to her long and impressive CV is her current role as the inaugural co-chair of the 2050 Climate Neutrality Commission, which is leading together with the Prime Minister as the other co-chair. In today's talk, Professor Yun will reflect on the work that the Commission has done so far and also share key challenges and opportunities that lie ahead of South Korea for it to fully become carbon neutral by 2050. Professor Yun has received many awards and prizes, including the Presidential Citation in 2018. Of course, I will not go through all of them, but let me highlight one of them as a way of ending this introduction. In 2011, Professor Yun was featured in a national newspaper as one of the few academics who would become a societal leader in 10 years' time. And now that a decade has passed, I would say that prediction was largely correct, except that it didn't take a full decade. In many ways, Professor Yun has been a great role model for me personally, but I'm sure also it's the same for countless others. Now, before I give the floor to Professor Yun, I'd like to also introduce our discussant, Dr. Annisa Triyanti. Dr. Annisa Triyanti is a postdoctoral research fellow, but will become an assistant professor soon, in a few months' time. And she's doing research on water and climate governance at Utrecht University. Prior to her current position, she worked as a lecturer in Indonesia, and for many years she was also a global youth advocate at the intergovernmental level, working on the development of the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, among many other things. Dr. Triyanti is currently leading the Asia Pacific Working Group within the Earth System Governance Network, and in that role, she leads the research effort on and from the Asia Pacific region. And I'm very excited to have Dr. Triyanti today to share her insights on climate policy, and she'll be moderating together with Gustav the Q&A session, which I hope will spur an interesting comparative discussion. Now I'd like to invite Professor Yun to start the presentation. The floor is yours, Professor.
Thank you. It is an honor of me to be here as invited speaker, and I did not expect that this kind of very young students and scholars here. It is very exciting. I think the issue I will deal with in this session, in this speech is climate change. So young generation or young scholars and young people will be exposed to the climate change issue for longer time compared with the adults like me. But anyway, thank you so much for introduction of me. So anyway, I want to share my experience as a co-chairperson of 2050 Carbon Neutrality Commission with our Prime Minister in Korea. So the title of today's speech is The Road to Carbon Neutrality and Sustainable Development, Earth System Governance in South Korea. And actually, I'm not sure how familiar, maybe how you are familiar with Korea, how much you know about Korea. I don't know. So let me briefly introduce the current situation of Korea in terms of carbon emission and greenhouse gas emissions. Actually, South Korea is the 10th largest economy. So even though the size of land is not big enough, but the scale of economy is big currently, 10th of the world. So its carbon emission is very big, especially our economy is heavily dependent on manufacturing industry, especially car manufacturing, steel manufacturing, petrochemical and cement industry. Those are very energy intensive. So as you can see here, it shows you the trend of major countries' greenhouse gas emissions. So you can see here, South Korea, maybe in terms of absolute amount, it is not big enough compared with others, but it ranks maybe tenth of the largest emission. So South Korea's greenhouse gas emissions from 1990, it is the base year of our UNFCCC, United Nations Framework on Climate Change. The base year was 1990. So from 1990 to 2018, it is the base year of Korea concerning 2030 NDC, nationally determined contributions. But anyway, 2.5 times increase. It is huge. And how about CO2 emissions? It is a little bigger increase, 2.7 times. And the right side, you can see the world's top 10 emitters, and Korea ranked number 9. So it means Korea is huge CO2 emitters. And you can see here what sector is the source of greenhouse gas emissions and the CO2 emissions. In case of Korea, transformation is the largest one. Transformation sector means making electricity and heat. So it accounts for 37%. And the next one is industry, 36%. But it does not include indirect emission. If we include indirect emission means maybe consumption, emissions from consumption of electricity. It became around 54% of total emission comes from industrial sector. So industrial sector's share of greenhouse gas emission is huge in Korea. And you can see here, Korea ranked number 11 in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. So China ranked number 1, and the second was US and EU, 27 countries. And South Korea ranked number 11th in the world in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. And you can see there, the green part, the lower emissions of 100 countries just account for 3%. So it shows you a kind of carbon inequity. But anyway, it means Korea should share a big responsibility to deal with the climate change. And Korea is very important to respond to climate change. So that is the reason I'll show you this kind of figures. And how about the trend of Korea's greenhouse gas emissions? Actually, in 2009, the Korean government announced 2020 reduction target. So we already passed the 2020. So what was the result? We achieved the target or not? So you can see here, we could not achieve the target. The green was BAU. If we just emit business as usual, maybe Korea will emit 776 billion tons in 2020. So in 2009, the then government made a reduction target. It is 30% from there. So it become 543. So that is the blue line. So we should follow the blue line to achieve our reduction target. How about the result? That is the real emission shows the red line. we couldn't achieve, even though we did not follow the green line, that is business as usual, but we could not achieve our reduction target. There was 105 million tons difference between the target and our real achievement. But, especially during 2010, 2013, even our real emissions even exceed our BAU. But fortunately, we reduced our reduction from since 2018. So we should maintain such kind of reduction trend. That should be our goal. So how about the progress of Moon Jae-in government, our ex-government, current government in the Yoon Suk-yeol government? It began May 10th. So I will say about our achievement during ex-government, because the ex-government, Moon Jae-in government, announced 2050 carbon neutrality and established 2050 carbon neutrality scenario. So I was a part of that work. So you can see here, Moon Jae-in government took the power May 10th of 2017. And right after he became the president, the government announced energy transition, issued the energy transition roadmap, and energy transition became national task. And this government is the first government in Korean history which announced nuclear phase-out policy. So it was the first time. And then July 2020, the government announced Korean New Deal. It included Green New Deal to achieve some reduction of carbon emissions. We should take Green New Deal as a way to achieve it. And October 2020, President Moon Jae-in declared 2050 net zero or carbon neutrality when he had a speech in front of the National Assembly. So he declared 2050 carbon neutrality. And then the government issued carbon neutrality promotion strategy in December 2010. And last year, maybe the end of May, P4G Seoul Summit was held. And right before that event, 2050 Carbon Neutrality Commission was established. So I became the co-chairperson of 2050 Carbon Neutrality Commission. And at that time, when I was maybe proposed to be co-chairperson of that commission, I hesitated a lot because I expected severe, extreme criticism from both sides, from NGOs and industrial sector. So I should take this position or not? But I thought I should do that. Even though I can be criticized, I want to maybe make one step forward. Because, I wrote my thesis and dissertation about climate change. I've got my MA in 1997, and I've got my PhD in 2001. And so, as an earlier pioneer in Korea to have thesis and dissertation about climate change, I thought I have a social responsibility to solve this problem for my children, for my students, for next generation, and for other species, not just human beings. So anyway, even though regardless of those criticisms expected, I took the position and I asked the commissioner, you will be criticized, but we have a social responsibility. We should endure and we should go together. So anyway, and last year, September, our National Assembly legislated Framework Act on Carbon Neutrality and Green Growth. And it was effective this year, March 20, fifth. And actually, last year, October, 2050 carbon neutrality scenario was determined and announced. And ex-President Moon Jae-in announced our enhanced 2030 NDC at COP26. That is the history of until current situation. So that is the background of maybe the making of the 2050 Carbon Neutrality Commission. As I mentioned, the lower line shows you the track of our policy. So 2009, we announced 2020 reduction target. At that time, it was based on business as usual. So 30% reduction from business as usual by 2020. And in 2015, before the Paris Agreement was made, our government announced 2030 reduction target. That was a 37% from BAU. And 2019, the government, at this time, Moon Jae-in government changed the way of setting reduction target. It is not BAU based because BAU can be changed. So absolute base year is very important. So at this time, the government changed the way of setting reduction target. It was 24.4% from 2017 emissions. And then 2020, maybe the 2050 carbon neutrality was declared, and our commission was launched last year. That is the way. So I want to show our governance system concerning climate change response, especially climate, maybe carbon neutrality. So this figure shows you the composition of, I can say just the CNC, Carbon Neutrality Commission, but now it was renamed Carbon Neutrality and Green Growth. Actually, I don't want to include green growth there, but our National Assembly legislated the law. So based on the law, our commission's name has changed. It included green growth finally. But at first, it's just the Carbon Neutrality Commission. But anyway, the status of that commission was President's Public-Private Joint Advisory Commission. It belonged to the president. So the role is to give advice to the president and to the ministries. But you know, it is very big organization. It includes 18 ministers. So all ministers are commissioners. So I was chairperson, and our ministers are just the commissioners. So and at that time, just 18 ministers, but after the effectuation of the law framework act on carbon neutrality and green growth, 3 more ministers were maybe became the member of ex officio members. So you can see here 18 ministries, and bottom line, I added 3 more ministers from government. And it is not just a governmental organization. Private sectors are very important. Even more members comes from civic sectors. It includes academia, expert, industry, labor union, and farmers association, and youth group, and local governments. And in case of civic organizations, it included environmental organization, energy organization, climate change organization, and educational organization, and consumers organization. So many organizations are included. So 77 members were appointed by the president to represent civil society, non-official governmental sector. What is the role of the commission? It is the control tower of carbon neutrality policy and the focal point of participation and communication, participation of the public and the communication with the public. So it is a kind of a social dialogue channel. So there are too many ministries are involved in carbon neutrality, but they have their different interests. So we should coordinate, and if there is conflict, we should adjust. That is the role of the commission. And there are publics and the stakeholders. We should hear their voice. So there should be a social channel. So the CNC became the focal point of social channel. That is the role. So how it was organized or composed? So it has many components. General commissions are there, and chairperson were two, prime minister and the private sector co-chairperson. That was me. And commissioners, as I mentioned, ministers, experts, representatives from diverse groups. And behind that, below that, general planning commission we had. So private sector co-chairperson, I was the chairperson of that general planning commission. And there are 8 subcommissions, and 8 subcommissions has their own chairperson and the secretaries. So those members are the members of a general planning commission. And very interesting one was it has both sides organization. One is the consultation bodies. So the role of consultation bodies is to hear the voices of stakeholders. Another one was Citizens Council for Carbon Neutrality, because the public are also stakeholders, or they should reflect their voice, or they should comply, maybe they should maybe follow the government's maybe ask or request, or they should provide their suggestions. So that is the Citizens Council for Carbon Neutrality. So it is the representatives of the public, lay people. So I will say about the arrangement of this council later. And I already mentioned 8 sub-commissions: climate change, energy innovation, economy and industry, green life, just transition, science and technology, international cooperation, and citizens participation. So 8 sub-commissions we have. And there are another commission. It is experts commission. If sub-commission want to have more in-depth knowledge or expertise concerning special issues, they can organize experts commission. So we had 8 expert commission, and they dealt with this kind of issues. You can see here operation of 2050 Carbon Neutrality Commission, sub-commission, and beside expert group and the General Planning Commission, consultation mechanism, Citizens Council for Carbon Neutrality, and the Commission of the Whole. That is the organ which has final decision making. So this kind of operational mechanism we have. And important one is secretariat. If they do not have their own supporting organization, the commission cannot do something. So we should have some budget and organization and personnel. That is very important to push some policy and to implement some policy and to coordinate or adjust issues among ministries. Maybe this secretariat is very important. So we have many committee or commissions under the president or prime minister, but this CNC has one of the biggest office to support the CNC. So it is very important. For example, it has a secretariat, secretary general, and 5 bureaus, 9 divisions, and 5 teams. And it has many subdivisions also. And you can see here, it figured out the operational mechanism again. So you can see here, steering steering commission is a general planning commission, the same, and subcommission, commission of expert group, and one part citizens council for carbon neutrality and consultative bodies. So I will say more specifically about that. This one. How significant Citizens Council for Carbon Neutrality? Discussion forum was made to give information to them and communicate with them. So it consisted of representatives, more than 500 citizen members, because general public also should be a part of a policy-making process. Why? They are taxpayers, and they are exposed to climate crisis. So they have a keen interest to this issue. And if we have a carbon neutrality policy, everything should be changed. So it can cause some maybe instability in their daily life, or those actions to change our social structure gives impact on their livelihood and their jobs, their employment. So they are very important stakeholders in one way. So we had many parts to hear their voice. One is operating citizens carbon classroom, because general people or lay people do not have enough information about climate crisis and the carbon neutrality policy. Why it is important? What kind of impact will be given by that? Or what kind of policies are proposed by the government? Why they are important? Which issues they are deal with? But which part is missing? They should know, and they should provide their opinions. So we operated the Citizens Carbon Classroom, and another one is in-depth consultation within Citizens Council, and supporting programs for in-depth consultation. Provide some information and knowledge and communication with experts and discussion among themselves. So we have had 4 times research polls. So it shows their opinion, and we can follow some changes in their opinion. Even though we have the same questions, their answers can be different based on their knowledge and information, and based on their discussion among citizens who participate in this process. So how they can be selected, how they selected, at this time, usually in Korea, if we have a public engagement process, citizens are collected or selected from adults, especially above 19 years old. But for this Citizens Council for Carbon Neutrality, we maybe included more ages, above 15. Why? Because we think youth group's voice is important. So we want to make more younger, maybe youth group can be a part of this decision-making process. So the age deadline or the boundary was expanded to include above 15. And we conducted a telephone investigation to collect members of Citizens Council for Carbon Neutrality, and then we considered geographical, so 17 cities and provinces we have, and the gender, age groups. So we selected maybe more than 500, because up to their conditions, some people cannot join. So we have some surplus. So actually we selected 533 people. And actually maybe around 500 participants was maybe participated in citizen debate finally. But anyway, this is the process. And they had open discussion on key issues and in-depth open discussion among citizens, and we promoted diverse and balance. That is the way we managed Citizens Council for Carbon Neutrality. And this is the schedule, how we prepared and decided 2050 carbon neutrality scenarios. Actually, the draft of the scenario was developed by 72 experts. They were suggested or recommended by the government and nationally affiliated research institute. And then the government prepared the draft, and they submitted that draft to us, and the CNC has a right to review and to maybe deliberate the draft. And we gave some maybe some ideas to change the draft, and finally we decided the final version. That was the way, and you can see here the time schedule. And in case of 2030 NDC, why we enhanced that? Because to meet 2050 carbon neutrality, our existing 2030 NDC was not enough. So before we had the 2050 carbon neutrality scenario or announcement, we made, as I mentioned, maybe 24% from 2017 emissions, but that's not enough to achieve 2050 goal, carbon neutrality goal. So we should strengthen the target of 2030. So we went through this process to have it, and we announced it at COP26. So what kind of a process we had? You know, we have meetings between ourselves within commission, and we had open discussion to invite the lay people, and we had meetings with the stakeholders. As I mentioned, the consultative bodies we mobilized, and we had meetings and discussions with Citizens Council for Carbon Neutrality. Very diverse ways we went through. So we made a draft of 2050 carbon neutrality scenarios. You know, the scenario means it is not the target itself. It shows the maybe the picture. If what kind of society we will live? Can you imagine 2050 carbon neutral society? In this society, what kind of life we will have? What kind of industrial structure we have? What kind of energy source we will depend? So this shows, the scenario shows that kind of stuff. And this scenario can be changed depending on changed social conditions, or more deepening climate crisis, or strengthened international pressure. There are many contexts it can be changed. But anyway, at this stage, we can figure out what kind of society we can have if we achieve 2050 carbon neutrality, and or reversely, we can imagine to achieve such kind of society, what kind of changes we should have in our existing society. It gives us such kind of implication. So to establish 2050 carbon scenario, we made a vision. I think a vision is very important. It shows you the goal. So the vision was building safe and sustainable carbon neutral society free from calamity of climate crisis. And we adopted 5 principles: responsibility, inclusiveness, fairness, reasonableness, and innovation. And this was the draft of our 2050 carbon neutrality scenario. Originally, there were 3 scenarios we developed. Actually, scenario 1 and 2 was given by our government. Scenario 3 was developed by CNC. So actually, this shows you all net zero. But the difference is scenario 1 and 2. Net zero cannot be achieved within our society. There should be international cooperation. Otherwise, net zero cannot be achieved. Scenario 3 only shows you domestic net zero. So what is the implication of this scenario? Why we cannot have domestic net zero with scenario 1 and 2? We should ask that questions. Why? Because the scenario 1 includes coal-fired power plant. Scenario 2 includes LNG-fired power plant. So if we keep those fossil-fueled power plants, net zero cannot be achieved within our society. And if we have the fossil-fueled power system, we should have more and more CCUS. That is the implication of this scenario. You can see here, more CCUS. But I think our people should hear or should raise such kind of questions and catch that implication. But can you imagine what was the result after I announced? It's me. I announced this draft scenario. What was the social reactions? Both sides want to kill me. You can see I translated the mass media's title, the news article title, goal oversight, tabletop rhetoric, deception of the people. So the industrial sector, the industry just says, they argued, it is too high. You want to kill us. NGOs, oh man, can you achieve carbon neutral society with this scenario? Oh man, do you want to keep coal-fired power plant by 2050? Oh man, and they say I a kind of climate destroyer. So they distributed a picture, X signs on my face. So I cried a lot at that time. But anyway, polar opposite. So I wrote an article. This is the article I wrote, polar opposite angles of looking at carbon neutrality. So I wanted to deliver the meaning of carbon neutrality scenarios, the draft. So it shows us keeping coal-fired power plant cannot be a future. But NGOs just criticized, just with the coal-fired power plant, you are a liar. It is not the implication. You should read the meaning. If we just keep coal-fired power plant, 2050 carbon neutral society cannot be achieved within our society. Or if we have international cooperation, it is very difficult. We have a big amount of CCUS. Otherwise, we cannot achieve it. That was the implication. But they did not hear such kind of implication. They just criticized and complained and blamed me. So I think we should read the meaning. But anyway, so based on that scenario, draft scenario, we should collect people's opinion. That was the reason why we should draft first. Otherwise, we don't need to provide the draft. Maybe final version can be issued and can be declared. But we didn't do that. We announced draft first, and based on the draft, the social voices from diverse groups was collected, and those voices were reflected into final version of 2050 carbon neutrality scenario. So we have had meetings with labor groups, farmers, and other stakeholders in each industry, civic organizations, and local governments. In total, 20 meetings with different groups, 20 meetings. The problem we had is short time period. It was very difficult, and I suggested it's better to have open document. So I requested the industrial groups and all other stakeholders group, please provide your statement document, and we upload your position paper into our web page, so everybody can read it and can understand your opinion from your position. So we had more than 90 statements from organizations. So you can, if you can read Korean, maybe you can read their position paper. But anyway, so we had many opinions from diverse groups. So major feedback were given to energy transition, industry, and hydrogen, and the CCUS. I'm sorry. And collecting public opinions from Citizens Council for Carbon Neutrality. I already mentioned we had carbon classroom. So there were 6 topics. One was power generation, resource circulation, forestation, agricultural and food, fair and just transition, and transportation. So we addressed many issues concerning those topics. But you know, it was very interesting. I will say like this. There are many, many questions. So I just selected the most important 2 questions here. We asked proper time to shut down coal-fired power plants. So you know, by 2050 was the biggest, 30.8%. By 2040, like that. And another big question was factors to be considered the most in establishing the carbon neutrality scenario. So the most important issues they selected was fair and just transition. But it is important, but it gives impact on people's answer. What? Before the learning process and the carbon classroom and Q&A or lectures from experts and discussion among participants, when we asked the same question, when is the proper time of closure of coal-fired power plant? The biggest one was not 2050. The biggest was 2035. It was delayed. Why? People thought about the workers employed in that industry. So they thought we should consider their position. So we should a little delay the closure time to give time for them. But you know, it is not good. But that is their sentiment. So we reflected their idea. It means we should not include coal-fired power plant in our 2050 carbon neutrality scenario, because the most people wanted before, because we can add 2040, 2030 means before 2050. So if we sum up all numbers, it is around 80%. So 80% wanted to close a coal-fired power plant before 2050. So scenario 1 of the draft scenario was removed based on this kind of public survey targeting civil citizens council. And you know, that is our final scenarios. It is composed of just 2, because the scenario 1, which included the coal-fired power plant, was canceled out, and 2 left. And we reversed the turn because people proposed us, suggested us, why do you put stronger one first? In your draft scenario, strongest came the last. No. Put first. So we followed that opinion. So scenario 1, plan 1 is the maybe stronger one, and scenario B is a little maybe moderate one. But the maybe difference is not big. And our scenario was strengthened. Why? People wanted domestic net zero without international cooperation. So this scenario shows you just domestic net zero here. In our draft, scenario 2 included international cooperation, but it doesn't include international cooperation. And we thought in 2050, every country achieve 2050 net zero. So there will not be many countries we can cooperate. So anyway, we should achieve carbon neutrality within our boundary. So that is the way. And the difference between these two scenarios is the biggest one is energy transformation. Scenario 1, zero emission. Why? It includes more than 70% of renewable energy for electricity generation and no carbon-based sources like hydrogen, especially green hydrogen, and some others. So that is the difference. So it reflects stakeholders' opinion and public opinion. That is the final version. And in case of NDC, to make 2050 carbon neutrality, we should strengthen it. So finally, it is 40% reduction from 2018 because originally it was based on 2017, but we changed the base year because 2018 was the peak year. So based on 2015, 18, the existing target can be translated like 27.3% reduction, but it was enhanced to 40%. So this is the result. But how can you evaluate this target? Is it strong or is it mild? What is your opinion? Can you imagine what is the opinions from social groups? The same. Industries, too high. Do you think it can be possible? Are you insane? That kind of stuff. And NGOs, oh no, at least 50%. Are you crazy? Can you make 2050 carbon neutrality with this very mild one? No. So they had a demonstration in front of our building. Yeah, and I want to show you the legal base. I think legal base is very important for governance. Otherwise, if we have different government, the previous effort can be canceled out. So, our National Assembly thought it is very important to have a legal base. So, they legislate the Framework Act on Carbon Neutrality and Green Growth. So, it was the 14th country which made this kind of legal base. And in this act, National Assembly required at least a 35% reduction from 2018. And the government, especially CNC, pushed the target, more strengthened the target up to 40%. And here you can see just the transition and the mitigation. New policy measures were included. Climate impact assessment and greenhouse gas responsible budgeting like that. And the funding is very important. Otherwise, we cannot push some policy implementation. So to save time, I want to go over here. So still, there are many, many social challenges. People ask the question like this. Do you think 2050 carbon neutrality is possible? When I face such kind of question, I argue them, or I tell them, you should change your question. It is the way we should follow. So the question should be like that. How can we make it possible? Not just is it possible? No. How can we make it possible? And we should make solutions. That is the way we should follow. So there are many. So I cannot enumerate too many because everything should be changed. Why? Our current social structure and our daily lifestyle and our institutions all are based on fossil fuels and centralized energy system and resource abundant consumption. Without change this one, how can carbon neutral society be achieved? So everything should be changed. So everything is our challenge. So I just exemplify in our electricity sector, transformation sector. It is very important because, as I mentioned, it is the biggest greenhouse gas emission and carbon emission source in Korea. But Korea electricity fair price is very low, very, very low. So people are not sensitive consumption of electricity. And our electric market is monopolized by Korean Power Corporation. It is public corporation, but people like it. That is problem. So anyway, there are too many issues here, so I cannot go into. And I want to say to you about this. When you ask people in Korea, how do you think climate crisis is serious, or how much serious it is? If they maybe have such kind of question, more than 90%, maybe recently 97% answer, yeah, it is serious. Around more than 60% people think very serious. And when they have a question like, does climate crisis affect your life? Yes, more than 90%. Just if they have this single problem, they say it is very serious. But if they have multiple problems, not just the climate change, other environmental problems, climate change is not prioritized in Korea. It ranks number 4, not number 2 or 3, number 4. Number 1 is waste issue. Number 2 is air pollution, especially fine dust. Number 3 is kind of another waste issue, over packaging. Number 4 is green global warming or climate change. And we had the presidential election last March. Do you think people vote based on candidates' commitment about climate change? We had a local election last June. Did they vote because of climate change issue? No, not at all. So, here, voters' agenda for our society, there was a research it was done by the Korea broadcasting station, and they requested a poll research group. Public 10 most important agenda, there is no mention about climate change, nothing. How about expert? Number 1, ranks the first. There is a big difference. What kind of issues our general public are concerned about? Stabilizing housing price. Others are not important. This is the most important issue. When we come here, on the way to here, I already explained about our young generation. I have many young people here. Do you think climate change is the most serious issues in your daily life or for your future? Maybe here, maybe yes. But in Korea, we have such kind of young people we have, but they are outliers. Normal young people, dating, marriage, housing is the most important. Climate change? No, maybe our government will solve it. Why not? No, it is not my responsibility. That is the public sense. So it is very maybe problematic. So here, another survey result. There was a change in public opinion. In 2017, it was the first year of Moon Jae-in government. The current one, 2020, Yoon Suk-yeol government, different government. You can see people's mind has changed. At that time, nuclear power, new nuclear power plant construction should stop around 50%. All the nuclear power plants shut down, more than 70%. But now, you can see the second important issue is here, this one. You can maybe rethink about our nuclear phase-out policy, and our renewable energy policy is a little awkward. It has renewable energy also has environmental impact and the social problem. We should maybe go not very quickly, that kind of things. But it is a little conflicting answer here. But anyway, you can see very different opinion among public. So, and then you can raise the question, why such kind of change we came to have? Why? Let me answer that question later. Yeah, and I had the sustainable development in my presentation title. So, you know, sustainable development is the ultimate goal. It is the comprehensive goal, including climate change. Climate change is a part of this. Goal 13 is climate action. But in Korea, there was some mismatch. Originally, this Presidential Commission on Sustainable Development was established in 2000 under the president. But Lee Myung-bak government changed its position. It was downgraded into ministerial committee under Ministry of Environment. Instead, they established Presidential Committee on Green Growth. So green growth went up. It was the most important, and sustainable development was downgraded. So there was, the position should be changed. But now, finally, our government, our assembly, maybe it is December, the Framework Act on Sustainable Development was legislated, fortunately, and it will be effective in July. So the National Commission on Sustainable Development will be composed after the effectuation of this act. So we should see what kind of role it will do and will play. That is our challenge. So this is my position, wrong position. Sustainable development is the most broad and comprehensive concept, but it was downgraded, the position was, and poor capacity. Not just the downgrade itself, it doesn't have any secretariat and its own organization. I mentioned already, CNC has a big number of personnel and big budget. So it can effectuate implement some policy, but here, no, so it is very discursive level. So and the problem we have is still the relationship between CNC and National Commission on Sustainable Development, the new one, the relationship is not clear, vague. So which role will be done by this National Commission on Sustainable Development will have concerning climate change. It is not clear, but maybe I think adaptation can be done by this because it includes the act includes some climate crisis response. Yeah, the current situation is, I want to summarize this one. 2030 NDC and 2050 carbon neutrality goal will be maintained, even though new government was maybe started, because it is international promise. So I think international promise, international pressure is very important. And our industry is export oriented, so international market is important. So I think international pressure is very important. And the 2050 Carbon Neutrality and Green Growth Commission will be recomposed because the act was effectuated and new government started. And a plan for the planned conversion of fossil fuel power generation required. And the most important argument of this new government is expansion of nuclear power. That is the most strongest one. So this government think expansion of nuclear power can solve our challenge for carbon neutrality. Do you think so? So that is their position. So we do not have any specific national plan for expansion of renewable energy yet. That is problem. And the first National Commission on Sustainable Development needs to be established after effectuation of new law. So we should wait until that time. Yeah, this is those are my presentation. Thank you.
Thanks so much for a very insightful presentation, Professor Sun-Jin Yun. I'm very honored actually to be invited to give a discussion points for today. Yeah, maybe because of the interest of time, maybe I shouldn't summarize your presentation. I think it was really nice and very giving us very much information about South Korea and also how it's about the development of carbon neutrality policy and also sustainable development. But the one thing that sticks with me is really your last remark that you said that this scenario development, it's not about the question of if it's feasible to achieve carbon neutrality in 2050, but really about what can we do to achieve that. I think that's quite impressive and also optimistic. Yeah, I wanted to actually divide my discussion points that I prepared for this in three points. The first one is related to the role of political will. I thought that with the establishment of this committee, it really shows the high political will of the Korean government. Um, and of course, as the governance scholars, we always use political will when we lack of political will thereof, when we actually cannot observe any commitment from the government. But I try to actually look up again the definition of political will. And one of the most famous definition used is that political will exists when there are sufficient set of decision makers with understanding of particular problem in formal agenda and also committed to supporting a commonly perceived as an effective policy solutions to a problem. And I think in this case, the problem is very clear. It's about climate crisis. We need to mitigate and also to adapt to climate change and also have a sufficient, efficient, and also appropriate climate policies in place. And the Republic of Korea is quite brave in my view and very ambitious in setting this goal. Reflecting on my own country, I come from Indonesia, and we simply couldn't commit to that kind of commitment, largely due to the development vision that is very strongly reflected by our government. And the question here, maybe also reflections later on, like to what extent political will is enough to really help in achieving this target. And I also would be curious to hear, for example, how the transition of the Moon to Yoon's government actually changed the whole discussion about the achieving zero or net zero carbon emission in 2050 for Korea. But I think it's quite clear from your presentation that maybe it's not about political will, but it's about setting up the process. Like it's quite impressive the way the committees established with a lot of participation from different layers of society. But maybe you can respond to that later on. And I think we shouldn't also forget that Korea recently changed their status. I think by UNCTAD from developing to developed countries. I mean, a lot of Asian countries are looking up to Korea in terms of economic development. And yeah, I was wondering if it actually helped the Republic of Korea to revision its climate and sustainable development agenda. I could imagine it can bring challenges, of course, especially if you're expected to catch up with other developed country, but it can also be an opportunity as an Asian leader country to give this kind of impression that other Asian countries could also do the same, like Korea. Yeah, and I think it's about international politics again. I mean, you mentioned it also in your presentation. And the second point that I wanted to raise is regarding the climate policies in general. I mean, my expertise is actually on climate adaptation. Um, of course, your focus is more on energy and also carbon emission mitigation. But how do you see the link between mitigation and adaptation in your country? Yeah, the big chunk of my work again is on adaptation. I also heard or read the news about the disasters happening in Korea, like the torrential rain in 2020 that actually forced the Yongdam hydropower to open its gates for emergency water discharge and leading to downstream flooding that actually damaged electricity supply. So there's always a connection between resilience and also in terms of energy infrastructure. So how much of a priority adaptation is in your country? And lastly, I would like to express that I'm very inspired by your role. I mean, as a woman, early career scientist that came actually from Asia. So I know how patriotic the system is. That's why maybe I move here. But I'm very impressed because you stay there and then you try to really contribute with your expertise despite all of the challenges, and then you speak here also to our students who are the future generations. Let's say I can see some of our maybe Asian students also here. What kind of messages you have for us in terms of really revisioning our role? As I don't know, maybe our students wants to be other than academics, but I wanted to be a researcher. I wanted to be a professor the whole of my life. So I was wondering what makes you stay despite all of this polarization, bad words that you receive from people from different sectors, let's say. What motivates you to stay in this field, let's say? I would really love to hear that from you. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I think all questions are very important and very critical. I think it is very nice to think about it. The first one is about political will. I think political will is very important, especially in Korea when we had the 2050 carbon neutrality scenario and enhanced 2030 NDC. Actually, our president will was the most important. Actually, there are many ministers, but president's will was the strongest one. He pushed, and I pushed, and I think it is not strong enough, but in some way it is very difficult to achieve. And especially when I give you the introduction about Korea, why I introduced about the situation of industry, our industrial structure is very different from other OECD countries. Manufacturing industry's share is over 28 or 29%. It is very high. And especially those manufacturing, including steel industry, petrochemical industry, and cement industry, those are very energy intensive. So if we do not restructure our industry, it is very difficult. And they employ many people. So it is very closely related to people's livelihood and their survival. But carbon neutrality is the way we should go. If we just postpone our adaptation to this process, the pain is not maybe removed. It will become bigger and bigger. So it's better to change ourselves as soon as possible. So we persuade our people, and I think the president persuade the people, I think. So political will others, maybe we can say leadership is very important. But nowadays, our leader has changed, and the current president's political will is, I'm not sure. I don't know. So I hope the current president also has political will to push our implementation of our plans to achieve 2050 carbon neutrality scenario. But in case of Seoul, mayor has changed, but policy has changed a lot. So leadership is very important. If we have more strong leader with more political will to achieve carbon neutrality, people should vote. Voting is the most important. That is my opinion. So political will should be stimulated by citizens. Even though some politicians has political will, if we do not select him as our representatives, those will cannot be realized. So I think the key is maybe placed in the hands of citizens. So citizens are very important to mobilize leaders' political will. So we should remember this aspect that I always argue this kind of approach. And South Korea is very important. Why? As she mentioned, we became developed countries officially. UNCTAD mentioned or declared Korea became developed countries. Korea is not developing country anymore. So, in the past, we just followed and catch up the way the other OECD countries or developed countries moved or just went through. But now we should make our own way. And another one is we can be a bridge between developed countries and developing countries. If we make a success, developing countries can have a hope. Wow, Korea did that. We can do the same thing. Why not? So, when the many ambassadors in Korea wanted to meet me, especially EU ambassador, and I met Netherlands ambassador from Netherlands, and they argued Korea should establish a stronger 2030 NDC because you can be an example, model for other countries. So, when I had a meeting with them, they asked me 50. They applaud and they asked me 50. So I said to them, yeah, I think 50 is better, but our condition is not maybe that is not make sense. That does not make sense when we consider our conditions. And you had longer history of industrialization and you have longer experience of emission of CO2 from fossil fuel combustion. So 2050 carbon neutrality target year is not equitable. You should have 2040 or 2035, or at least 2045. Why do we have the same target year? I asked. But anyway, I think Korea's role is very important to push other developing countries together with us. And how can I become like this person? Yeah, I think maybe it related to personality too. I think I'm not shy. I always argue my opinion, and even though Korea is a patriarchal society, but for me there was a room because my father raised me the same as a son, and I had leadership in schools. So maybe I just exercised my leadership, and I think people nowadays criticize political correctness, but that is my target or value. I think right thing should be accomplished. That is my value. If I pursue some values, I think it is not just describe the society, diagnose some problems. That's not enough. If I think something is good, something is right, we should achieve it. To achieve it, we change our society, current condition. That kind of maybe that kind of thinking made me like this, I think. Yeah, and I always challenge. I was a high school student. When I quit my job, my relatives and my friend and my neighbors said to me, "Why did you quit your job? It is very comfortable one. You can enjoy summer vacation and winter vacation in Korea. Teachers' social position is high and the salary is good, and we have salary in vacation, summer vacation and winter vacation different from developed countries. But so it is very nice." But I said to them, I want to challenge you. I don't want to stay as I was there. So I think the challenge is good. It can change myself. So you can challenge it. You can change yourself, I think. And then even though something we want to achieve is not achieved at once or soon, if we uh, try to make efforts continuously, it can come true, I think. So, just don't be shy and just challenge it and make a change in your self and your society and our planet as a whole. We can do that together. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much, Sun-Jin, for those final remarks. It's been really interesting listening to you, hearing all about how the process has been in South Korea and the participatory processes and what you're aiming for and your relations to the outside world in the promises that you make, and the political struggles, of course, within the country and the different wills that have more, in particular, been subjected to you. We will now conclude with a question answer. We are inviting everyone who's following us online to put in your questions now. Also in the audience, would be very happy to pass on this mic, or if you just want to state your question. If you do have a question, please raise your hand so I can see them. Otherwise, I will start with the question that has come in from online, and I will come over there after. I will start here. So the question is, as government or or from government, a government official, how can government work to change the citizen perception of remoteness? I think distance, and therefore sorry, it's a bit funny formulated, but how can we come closer to the problems of climate change and environmental issues? How can government work to bridge this distance between the concern we have for our climate? So I ask you to please turn it off.
Actually, I think education is very important. So in Korea, the government or maybe the National Assembly amended our Framework Act on Education and Education Promotion Act. In that, environmental education, especially climate change education, is a duty of our government. So in the past, it was not the obligation of the government, but now our government, including central government and local government, also should provide chances for our students and adults, even in social education program. We should include environmental education, especially climate change education. And I think continuous communication is very important. If we have some misunderstanding, we should discuss. We should have dialogue. And then we can have some kind of consensus. So I think we should have some common basis, and the common basis should be extended. And then we can maybe conclude some social consensus. Otherwise, maybe if just to push maybe some government change, that's not enough. Something changed. So I think make a social consensus is very important. In that, communication and education is a way to have that.
I will take the question from here.
I have two questions. Thank you for your presentation. My first question is about the process. Seems like the process was very inclusive as possible, but still there was a big backlash from both sides. So I want, if you were to do it again, what would you do to make it even more inclusive, so to reduce the backlash? And my second question is about aspiration. It's a nice aspiration to be carbon neutral by 2050, but there are countries like Bhutan which are carbon negative right now. And you said everything needs to be changed if you want to achieve the goal. So if you look at Bhutan, do you see some aspiration for South Korea as a country which is leading the climate march, I guess? Thank you.
So did you?
Climate march.
Yeah. Did you come from Bhutan? No? I visited Bhutan. Yeah, 2017, I visited Bhutan. Yeah, I like the country. Yeah, when I said, concerning the second question, when I said the whole social structure and lifestyle should be changed, it means if some country or some society is based on fossil fuel or energy abundant lifestyle, in that case, everything should be changed. So if Bhutan, it is a negative country because they conserve the forest a lot, and the forest absorb lots of CO2, and they emit a small amount of carbons compared with other countries. So their emission is negative. So in that case, maybe they should maintain the current situation, or if they can maybe improve people's life quality, still there is a room. But I think when I visited Bhutan or read books about Bhutan, the most impressive one is happiness is the most important index to evaluate government policy. I think that is very important. How many countries have a happiness index? And that is the central part of policy evaluation. When I visited the happiness maybe institute, maybe I'm not sure the exact name, but the institute about happiness, the National Institute, they manage or they give their people some advice. If somebody do not sleep enough, they thought 8-8-8 ratio. It is sleeping for 8 hours and working for 8 hours, and just leisure time or take a rest 8 hours. So that is the golden rate. So if somebody do not have such kind of ratio, the government maybe consider some people's physical health problem and mental problem and give some advice. It means Bhutan is the happiest country, no, but the government pursues or the people want to have a happy society or happy life. So in that case, maybe GDP is not the only index to measure the quality of life or the target they want to pursue. So in that case, I think such kind of approach should be maybe adopted by more societies. It can give some implications to change our society toward a more sustainable society. So that is my question and answer. And the first one, to reduce backlash, I'm not sure, but I think legal basis is very important. Actually, our new government want to establish ESG committee instead of CNC, but it is not possible. Why? CNC is legal, maybe law-based, act-based organization. So without amendment of Framework Act on carbon neutrality and green growth, the government or the president cannot make ESG committee instead of CNC. Maybe he can establish the ESG committee, but he cannot remove or maybe demolish CNC because our law requires CNC should be established. So I think that kind of legal basis is very important. And that law, that act includes some policy instrument. As I mentioned, climate change assessment, climate change impact assessment, or GHG sensitive budget system, such kind of institution is included. Maybe it cannot be changed easily. That is my question.
Thank you very much, Sun-Jin. And we are now on time. We are kind of nearly over time. So unless we have any questions from the audience at this stage, I think it's time to wrap up this very interesting session. And I think, on behalf of the Earth System Governance Project, on behalf of Utrecht University, Copernicus Institute of Sustainable Development, we thank you very much for coming here. And we look forward to seeing you at future events. We hope to connect further. And I also would like to thank the audience that have made it here today on, at least in the Netherlands, this very warm day. We will have some refreshing beverages and finger food outside afterward if you do want to talk to Sun-Jin Yun afterward. And thank you to the audience joining us online. That is it from us today. The next webinar with the Earth System Governance speaker series will be about democratizing sustainability transformation, and maybe this citizens panel from the CNC may be an inspiration to them. Who knows? Once again, thank you. That is all from us.
Thank you so much.